Hey, welcome in. Well, we're constantly hearing about how terrible Western civilization is. Modern Western civilization and, common law and everything is so unfair and terrible and it's the worst society that's ever existed and the most unfair. And all the other societies and cultures out there are perfect, absolutely flawless. But anyway, let's take a look at another culture that you might have had the misfortune to be born into. A culture that is nothing like the nice, comfortable, very pleasant societies where we actually live now. Or hopefully that you're lucky enough to live in now and to have been born into. So anyway, that brings us to 10 brutal facts about growing up in the Aztec Empire. I don't know, are you allowed to say anything about this? I'm not going to say that it's bad. I mean, it's just the way that it was. And it's not fair to go back in history and criticize people in completely different cultures that had completely different views of the world. But I'm just going to make the point that perhaps there are certain things now that people should appreciate, considering all of the horror that has happened in history. The horror that most people lived through and died in. Anyway, what does it say here? It says, parents just don't raise kids like they used to. Yep, you can say that again. Back in the good old days, people raised their kids to be tough and didn't balk if that meant being strict with them. If a kid had to be held over a fire, forced to carry logs until he collapsed, or sent to starve in a temple, nobody looked twice. So, I don't know, Aztec Empire is already sounding a lot less nice than Canada. But anyway, first one. Newborn babies were told that life is pain. So they got right in. They started right away. What does it say here? The Aztecs didn't believe in lying to children, no matter how young they were. Now, of course, the newborn baby isn't going to understand that, but I'm sure they were going to figure it out soon enough. Let's see, when they heard a newborn baby crying, they didn't coo to it or try and convince it that everything was going to be fine. As far as they were concerned, that newborn baby had the right reaction to being alive. And they made sure those were the first words the baby heard. So that baby's crying? Yeah, it should be. Things are terrible in the Aztec Empire. It should be crying. Get used to it. Yeah, I guess there was very little of the you're a special, unique individual. Yeah, I don't think they were big on that. Let's see. Parents thought children only grew if you stretched them. So you can see here, it looks like they're trying to stretch out their heads, I guess, or their necks. Let's see. Aztec parents didn't really understand that kids grew on their own. They knew that babies got bigger over time, but they didn't fully comprehend that this was just the way the body worked. Now, in all fairness, nobody really knew anything, right? So, whatever. And apparently this was tied up with the religion as well, so you had to do this, and you had to do it in certain ways. There was a certain regimen for doing this, or else the gods would curse your children to a lifetime of being short. And that sounds to me like heightism or something. I don't know, something bad. It doesn't sound like equity to me. Let's see. 3, misbehaving children were dangled over fires. Let's see, it says Aztec kids weren't lazy. Their parents made sure of that. By the time a child was 8 years old, the parents figured he was ready to take some responsibility in his life. He was expected to get up early, do what he was told, and never dawdle. And if he didn't, his parents saw to it that he learned his lesson. So no hanging out in the basement all day, eating pizza. And I think definitely no going out and protesting at night. Let's see, if you're going to be doing that, the parents would stab their child with the spines from a maguey cactus. If it was a small offense, the kid would get a light prick in the wrist, but if it was really bad, it could get serious. Parents would strip their kids naked, bind their arms and wrists, and cover them with maguey spines? I don't know how that's pronounced. Maguey spines. So that explains why there was no Antifa. All right. Let's see. Poor children were forced to lug wood around. That doesn't necessarily sound so terrible, just hauling some wood around, but let's see. When children turned 15, they were sent off to school, so they started school at 15, okay? In the Aztec Empire, education was compulsory for all children, no matter who they were. But Aztec kids had to do a lot more than just learn fractions. I don't think there was any fraction learning there. Let's see, a poor child would be sent to the Telpachcali, where he would learn a trade and be tested in the art of war. Their teachers would be watching these kids to see if they were tough enough to become soldiers, and the teachers put the kids through hell to find out. Boys in the Telpachcali would have to go into the forest and gather firewood, partly because they needed it, and partly just to see how tough they were. Every time a boy went out, he'd be required to carry one more log than he had the previous time. Each day, they'd pile more and more wood on him until he eventually collapsed. So, I'm going to guess very little time for anarchist poetry. Let's see, noble children were starved and tortured, so even the nobility was not immune from it. Pretty much they made it hell for everybody, it looks like. Let's see, noble children and a few poor children, nominated by the priests, would be sent to the Calmecac, a school run by the Aztec head priest. Students in the Calmecac were expected to learn sacrifice and self-denial. Is that what they're teaching the kids at Harvard these days? Sacrifice and self-denial? I don't think so. Let's see. They would rise before dawn and sweep the temple. Then, when the work was done, they would start fasting. They were taught to be fond of empty-guttedness, so they were actively starved at every opportunity. Actively starved at every opportunity. And I'm guessing that things weren't going to go well if you asked where the vegan pepperoni was. So let's see, they would paint their entire bodies black. Well, that's like what Justin Trudeau did. I wonder if he went to a Calmecac. Anyway, don't tell leftists this or else they might go and protest at Chichen Itza. And that paint was almost the only thing on their bodies. They were barely allowed to wear any clothes because the priests thought that the kids would learn to be penitent if they were freezing to death. Again, I mean, this is, I think, a fairly different experience from a modern school. If anyone complained, the priest would beat him. So in that respect, it was a bit like Antifa. Just going to interrupt for 1 second to say, if you like this content, subscribe so you can see more. Thanks a lot. Let's see, how about this one? Boys who hadn't captured anyone were publicly shamed. Let's see, a boy couldn't become a man until he'd captured an enemy in battle. Until then, he was a disgraced little boy, and the Aztecs made sure everyone knew it. Let's see, when a child turned 10 years old, his parents would shave off all the hair on his head except for one tuft. From then on, that child was forbidden from cutting off the tuft until the day he defeated an enemy in battle and returned the captive to the Empire, often to be used as a human sacrifice. So, until then, the child had a growing tuft of hair to show the world his shame. But, I can't really argue here. I mean, bringing back a captured enemy soldier from battle to be used as a human sacrifice does build character in a child. There's no doubt about that. But here it gets really bad. Leftists should be really bad about this. Boys who didn't have the level of courage that straddles the line of insanity were stuck with their long tufts of hair. In that case, just going outside was torture. Girls would crowd around them and taunt them. Quote, "It is a stinking tuft of hair," the girls would yell. "It is a stinking tuft of hair. Art thou not a woman like me?" Now, aside from the fact that I doubt very much they spoken like King James English, right? You've got women here mocking these men for not being masculine enough and saying they're like women. Now, that is all kinds of problems. All kinds of problems. That is not politically correct at all. I mean, I bet they even use the wrong pronouns for them. Okay. The point of this is that not that anybody would like to be back there, right? I'm just saying if you're going to demonize the culture, if you're grown up in the United States or Canada or England, Australia, somewhere like that, and you're going to demonize these places, all right, for being such awful places, maybe you should learn a little something about history, about other cultures. I mean, other cultures in the world right now. If you're a feminist and you feel like you have so much to complain about in Ottawa, I would absolutely recommend you to take a month-long trip to Saudi Arabia and organize a slut walk there just to see, right? The point being that maybe we can try to have a little bit more of an objective view of what's really happening around us and our place in it. Anyway, if your kid's lazy, don't burn him with a firebrand. Come on. Let's see, there were mandatory late-night dance parties. Well, that doesn't sound so bad. That sounds like the Chaz, right? So, how about this? Whether rich or poor, every Aztec child had to go to the Cuiacali. It was basically an all-night dance party, and in Aztec culture, getting down was mandatory. This was the only place that Aztec boys and girls were allowed to be together. In school, they were separated, but when night fell, they were sent out to temples to party. There, the boys and girls could learn to sing sacred songs, dance ritual dances, and hear the stories of the gods and men. Let's see, it was their only real chance to get together, and they took it. When the party ended and everyone was sent home, it wasn't uncommon for some young couples to sneak off into the night and break a few rules together. The only problem with that was that boys who had premarital sex were publicly beaten. So, let's see, noble children were ordered to cut themselves. And I think they actually made a movie about this with, like, Angelina Jolie and Winona Ryder. I don't know. Anyway, this seemed like a terrible place to grow up and live. So I guess the point of this is when you're endlessly looking around for oppression and things that aren't fair, maybe just ask yourself occasionally, compared to what? Compared to the Aztec Empire? You got it pretty good. Anyway, that's all I got to say about that. Please subscribe, like, and share. That really helps me get around the algorithms. If you just like to listen, there's the podcast Radio Baloney. It's on just about every platform, including Google Podcasts. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next time.